Okay, got my popcorn, got my Coca-Cola, all set to sit back and watch you tell me about a cool monster. So go ahead, just start. Tell me about a great mask. You know, like a little of the history behind it, maybe who designed it or what company sells it, maybe like how much it normally costs, you know, what you might wear with it for a costume. Come on, tell. Aren't you gonna? You're not, are you? What? Oh, I'm on that side of the rectangle. The rectangle is, okay. You're watching me. I'm not watching. Okay, now I understand. So forget the snacks. I can do a creepy cheapie. How about that? Friends, if you're a fan of old school monsters, by which I mean monsters who are old and who graduated from school, like myself, you might have heard of something called the shock monster. Now, people throw the word iconic around a lot these years. There it goes. There it went. Somebody just threw it past here right now. The word iconic is used, I think, too frequently and too cavalierly, too freely these days. I don't mean I think they ought to start charging you money to say it. I just think people use it too often. Not that many things are truly iconic. But in the world of monsters and Halloween, something called the shock monster really is iconic. Now, the shock monster is a scary, ugly guy with one big bad eyeball. He's green. He's has big, nasty teeth and messy hair, which is either black or sometimes blue. And he was created very influentially. He was created by a super talented artist named Keith Ward, and there seems to be uncertainty as far as exactly when the first image of the shock monster was created, but it's believed to be, it could have been as far back as the mid-1950s, which would account for the makeup design of the Teenage Frankenstein, because the shock monster could have been an influence on that, because the Teenage Frankenstein is a mangled, mutilated face with one giant eyeball, and was featured in 2 movies. Teenage Frankenstein, also known as I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, which is a dumb but very fun movie, and a so dumb it's hard to sit through sequel, How to Make a Monster. And if you want to talk about disappointment, and I don't know why you would, but if you do, imagine being me as a kid and knowing that there was going to be a movie coming on called How to Make a Monster, and how exciting that sounded, and then it doesn't even tell you how to make a monster. Such false advertising. It's disgraceful. Anyway, the same basic makeup appeared in both of those movies, and making it, here's a trivia fact you might not have known, making it the only Frankenstein monster makeup design ever used in more than one movie, except the Universal concept, which is from the classic Universal Frankenstein movies. You know, I'm talking about the square topped head and the scar and the neck electrodes and the green and the, you know, that was used in a lot of movies, but the Teenage Frankenstein was also used in 2 movies instead of just one. So the shock monster may have influenced that, but he definitely influenced a ton of other things. It was such a common drawing and such a great, scary, garish, over-the-top kind of monster. Kids liked it, and it sort of became an emblem, an icon, a fetish of monsters and horror movies. Now, when it was originally created as a mask, which again, I'm not sure exactly what year the mask was created. I believe it was first sculpted by Keith Ward, who designed it. Although since then, 35,712 other people have sculpted their versions of it, because it's such a classic kind of face, it won't go away. But it came to sort of symbolize scary movies in general, and Halloween, and monsters in pop culture. So the shock monster's face ended up on, you know, bumper stickers and postcards and notepads and magnets and patches and all sorts of things with the shock monster. And I'll show you one thing I have here. It is the very talented Ed Repka's, you see this? Ed Repka Halloween party decorations to cut out. And he calls this his Topstone line, because the first mask of the Shock Monster was in fact by Topstone Industries, sold in the 60s and 70s, and advertised in the back of monster magazines. And this is what it looked like. And this is Ed Repka's take, which I think is brilliant. His fantastic version of the original Shock Monster illustration. And as I mentioned, there were a bunch of different versions of the mask over the years from different companies. Everybody has put out a Shock Monster or variation thereof. And the TV series The Walking Dead even featured a tribute Shock Monster zombie in one episode, just for those fans who will catch it. But even today, the Shock Monster is still everywhere. And he was first sold as simply horror or even horror zombie. And it's thought that maybe he's ended up being called Shock Monster, which is a much cooler name than horror. He may have been called that in an attempt to associate the mask with Shock Theater, which was a package of classic scary movies that people were just seeing on television for the first time beginning in the late 50s and through the 60s and 70s. But today's Shock Monster, and there have been scads of them over the years, today's Shock Monster, I would have to say, well, I wouldn't have to. Nobody's threatening me, forcing me to say it. Let me make that clear. Don't call like the police or anything. I'm fine. But I feel like personally, I have to say, best Shock Monster ever, right here. It looks exactly like the original Topstone Shock Monster, except it's much nicer quality. Now this came out in 2024 from the creeps at Trick or Treat, and while it doesn't actually say Topstone on the tag, it has the original Topstone drawing by Keith Ward on the tag, and it is, I believe it was developed from an original mold from back in the day. It looks exactly like it, and I've complained, if you know me, you know I've complained before about Topstone's masks because they were always advertised in old comic books and monster magazines with these great drawings that look so cool. And then when you would actually see the mask, it would look like a wad of chewed bubble gum. You could barely tell what it was supposed to be. They were just a mess. And every Halloween I would go into the stores that had Halloween masks for kids and find like a bin of Topstones, and I would try to pick through them and see one that looked like anything, but they were just super thin, super cheap, really badly made. But they sold for like 99 cents or $1.99, so you couldn't expect them to look like a Don Post mask. But many people out there, many horror fans and monster fans, always wish they could get their hands on a good Shock Monster, like a copy of that mask looking as good as it can, okay, instead of just being the El Cheapo. But Topstone didn't make high-end masks. They only made disposable Halloween novelty type masks. So this one, which came out in 2024 from Trick or Treat, is what we always wanted when we were kids. Now it's not a full head because the original was not a full head. It would just sort of sit there and it was like a 3/4, and I think you can see that. But this is very cool. It's even got an elastic string across the back to hold it on. It's got wonderful sewn in hair that looks all messy and floppy and very much like the old drawings used to look. And it's got the wonderful eye, and the eye is not even white. It's kind of a sick yellow brown color, which is even creepier somehow. And for display, I don't know if you can see this, but in the tradition of the old Cesar masks, it's got a hard plastic, rigid plastic shell in there. It's clear plastic that is stiff and holds him in shape so that it won't flop and droop, which the Topstone versions did. But this is what I always wanted to see, a really good version of the real Topstone Shock Monster, where they really did it lovingly and respectfully and made it look like everybody wished they could get when they were kids. And you can score one of these for a neighborhood of 40 bucks, which I think is pretty great. And you could use him with practically any kind of Halloween costume you could come up with, as long as it's a scary one. You know, not like a ballerina costume would not be good, but anything scary and creepy and raggedy. And as far as what he is, he could be a zombie, he could be a mutant, he could be a ghost, he could be whatever kind of lab experiment you think a shock monster might be. Remember that song by the B-52s? Shock Monster? Shock Monster? You don't remember Shock. It was in the 80s. It was, no? Everybody had matching shrouds. You don't remember? They don't remember that. Anyway. Legendary, iconic, shock monster, $40. Super cool.